Hey guys, welcome back to the wheel strategy. Step 2, selling covered calls. The wheel strategy is what many of us call our virtual ATM, our money printing machine. It does have risk and you must understand those risks, but in today's video, we're going to go through the basics of selling covered calls and what risks you need to know about and how we actually make money through this process. If you missed the first video, step 1, selling cash secured puts, be sure and go back and watch that one before you get into this video. Just a quick recap at a high level, the wheel strategy is a system to generate income from options premiums through selling cash secured puts, getting a entry, a position in a stock, owning the underlying shares. And then once you own the stock, selling covered calls on it. Remember that the wheel strategy should be utilized on a stock that you are comfortable owning. And all options trading has risks, including the wheel strategy. Make sure you do your homework and understand those basics and those risks before you begin utilizing the wheel strategy. Looking at our graphic over here on the right, we already sold cash secured puts. We identified a strike that if the stock fell down to that strike price, we would be willing to purchase it. That is the cash secured puts. And the stock fell under our strike price. We purchased the stock and now we own 100 shares of the stock or 1,000 shares, however many options that you sold, you now own the stock. And so we were assigned those shares and we're moving on now to owning the shares and selling covered calls on them as long as we own the stock. And while we are doing that on a weekly or a monthly basis, we are going to collect option premium, collect income by selling covered calls. You might consider selling covered calls if you are an investor who thinks the stock that you own has a neutral to optimistic long-term prospect with little likelihood of very large up or downside price movements. When someone sells a option, that is called writing the option. So when we sell covered calls, we are writing a call option on a stock that you own at least 100 shares of. And if things go as planned or as hoped anyways, you get to collect and keep that option premium every week or every month, as well as continuing to own those shares. The basic strategy involves selecting a strike price for your covered call, both above the current price of the stock and ideally above the price that you paid for the stock. You want your strike price to be above your cost basis for that stock. And ideally, if you want to both collect income and keep the stock, you want to pick a strike price where you don't quite think the stock is going to get there. You're okay if the price of the stock goes up, but if you want to keep the stock and keep generating money off the wheel, you want that strike price to be just out of reach of where you think the stock could go. But if it did get there, you're okay selling the stock at that price. So choose your strike prices carefully. Number one, you want to maximize the income that you're making. Number two, you got to think about where is this stock likely to go? And number three, if it hits my strike price, am I willing to sell there? Am I going to be okay with it if it reaches that strike price at the expiration date? I'm going to give you a real life example, but before we get into that, I want to make sure you fully understand what are covered calls, what are the benefits, and what are the risks that you need to be aware of. Because a lot of people talk about the wheel strategy and what a great income generating opportunity it is, and it is, but you need to make sure you understand some of these basic things before you jump in with both feet. The primary motive for someone writing covered calls, selling covered calls, is to earn premium income on it. Say you have a stock just sitting there in your portfolio. If it only reached price X, you would be willing to sell all those shares, but that might take a year or 2 years. So while you are sitting there waiting for it to go to that price, you could be generating income, earning income on that stock in the meantime. That has the effect of boosting your overall return on the stock and providing a measure of downside protection, because as you're generating that income, you could think of it as reducing your cost basis on that position that you own. The best candidates for covered calls are stock owners who are perfectly willing to sell the shares if the stock rises to the strike price that they chose and the calls are assigned. If you would be reluctant to part with your shares, especially if it had an unexpected rally, it might not be a good ticker to consider for the wheel strategy. What are some of the benefits of writing covered calls? Well, number one, it's immediate income generation. When you write a covered call, when you sell that call option, you are collecting that income, collecting that option premium immediately. That money goes right into your brokerage account. and it's available for you to use. The other thing is that I consider that option premium income as a basis reduction on my underlying shares. So if, in a very simple example, if I had $1,000 worth of shares sitting in my account and I sold $50 worth of call options on them, then in effect, I've reduced my basis on those shares from $1,000 to $950 because I generated $50 of income on that position. The other thing that options writers or sellers of options have in their favor is that the time decay is working in your favor. You collected 100% of the premium immediately, and you know how options decline in value as time goes on. Well, you already collected that money. You don't care about that theta or time decay. Only the person who bought that call option from you is being affected by the time decay. You collected 100% of your money on day one, and that is yours to keep. What are some of the risks of selling covered calls? Well, the max gain that you can get on your underlying position is limited by the strike price that you selected. If you have a stock that's trading at $25 right now and you say, okay, I'm going to sell covered calls on this with a $30 strike. If it goes over $30, that is the maximum that you're going to get for your shares when your options expire. Even if it runs up to 35 or 40, $30 would be your maximum gain. There is assignment risk if it runs over your strike price. I consider that a slight risk though, because you should only be utilizing covered calls or the wheel strategy if you're willing to sell the stock at your chosen strike price. If you're not willing to pick a strike price and willing to lose your shares at that price because you're going to make a profit if you're exercised, you're not willing to do that, do not utilize the wheel strategy. However, if you're picking strike prices that are well above your current cost basis and you're happy to sell at that price, then assignment risk, yeah, it exists, but you're actually hoping it gets there because, hey, if it reaches that price, I'm happy to sell my stock. You are exposed to some volatility risk. If you pick a stock and it has a massive unforeseen run-up, as we said in the bullet number 1 here at the top, you have a maximum gain limitation. Maximum gain would be the strike price that you chose. So if you're worried about volatility, don't use the wheel strategy on high volatility stocks. Only choose low volatility stocks. Many of us still utilize the wheel on high volatility stocks because the money that you can make selling call options is higher. It's just something you need to be aware of and make sure you're choosing your strike prices correctly. What is the maximum loss risk with this strategy? Well, you own the shares and you're selling covered calls to make money on them. But if some bad news comes out on that stock and it plummets to zero, let's say, you're going to lose money on those underlying shares. That is the same risk that you would have if you were holding the shares and not selling covered calls. So that risk exists whether you're selling covered calls or not. I consider it a slight risk. In fact, if it plummeted to zero, you might be wiped out on your shares, but your loss was offset by the income you made by selling the covered calls. One other thing to be aware of is tax liability. Let's say you picked a strike price for your covered call and at the expiration date, the stock price on the underlying shares was above your strike and your option is exercised and your shares are sold out from under you at the strike price you chose. You're going to likely have a gain on those shares. And so there could be some tax liability. I'm kind of stating the obvious here, but I want to make sure I cover all of the bases. And you might want to think about the overall market conditions when you're using this strategy. If you're in a massive bull market and you're trying to sell covered calls and all of the stocks are just making a run up towards those strike prices, that's something you got to factor in. Maybe it's not the right time for the wheel strategy, or maybe you need to pick much higher strike prices before you sell those covered calls. So don't just look at the stock you're trading, look at the overall market conditions. And as we mentioned on previous slides, stock volatility, the underlying stock itself, has some implications on whether or not you use the wheel on it and or what strike prices that you pick. Now that we got all of that out of the way, let's talk about how do we choose a stock? Well, number one, you want to choose a stock that you're comfortable with potentially owning long term. For minimal risk, pick a stock with low volatility. If you want a little bit higher risk and higher premiums from selling those options, you could pick a higher volatility stock. I generally only recommend that for more experienced wheel or more experienced options traders. Companies with strong fundamentals are ideal for lower risk. Choosing companies with weak fundamentals, like a short squeeze play or a money losing stock, might get you higher premiums, but you're going to have higher risk owning those shares for a longer term period. And number 4, pick stocks with high options liquidity. And by the same token, pick strike prices with high liquidity, where you can see a lot of volume on those strikes. That will help ensure that on those options that you have tight bid-ask spreads. How do you choose your strike price for your covered call? Well, obviously you're going to pick a strike price above the current stock price, and ideally at some fundamental or technical level that you have identified that you're comfortable selling the stock at. Where do I think that the stock price is going to go over the next week or over the next month? And then I'll pick my strike price right above that. So ideally I get to keep my shares and I get to keep that premium income. But if it reaches that level, I'm okay selling my stock. Really picking your strike price comes down to your own individual risk tolerance. When it comes to choosing an expiration date for your covered calls, most people are doing weeklies, some are doing monthlies. Really depends on the volatility of the stock that you're looking at and what type of option premium you're able to get from selling options on that stock. One other thing to point out is be aware of the earnings dates coming up for the stock that you own, because volatility might increase and that could be a factor in choosing your strike price. All right, let's close this out with a real life example. I'm going to pick a low risk, lower volatility stock. Let's just say that we are talking about an investor that owns 100 shares of CVS, and their cost basis that they got those shares at was $52. And this investor is willing to sell at any point where CVS increases in value by 15%, so around $60. CVS is currently trading at $57, and analysts have a 12-month price target average of $73 for CVS. So let's just say we're going to sell a covered call, let's go a month out. We're going to sell a OTM covered call at a $60 strike price. If we can make 15% in a month, we're happy to sell at $60. Remember, our cost basis was $52. We don't necessarily think that CVS is going to hit $60 in 30 days, but if it does, we're willing to sell at that price. Looking on our broker, we can see that the $60 strike trading 30 days away has a bid of 77 cents and an ask of 81. Let's just say we put in an order to sell our covered call at 80 cents and that order goes through. So we collect immediately $80. Well, now we're just going to wait 30 days. And if in 30 days CVS is still below $60, then our call option that we sold is going to expire worthless. We get to keep the $80 no matter what. The only person who has to worry about the call option expiring worthless is the person who bought it. But the income generated is ours, and then we can repeat that process selling a covered call again. If, however, CVS is above $60 in 30 days, then our call option is going to be assigned and our broker is going to sell our shares at the agreed upon price. And he's going to give us $60 per share. So $6,000. So the cost basis was $52, 5,200. We collected $6,000 from the sale of the shares. So our total gain on the shares was $800. We sold the call option for $80. So our total gain on these shares was $880. What we have effectively done is increased our return on these shares. We were hoping to sell at $60 to lock in a 15% gain. But when you add in the options premium that you also collected, your effective gain becomes nearly 17%. That might not seem like a big difference, but if you're effectively doing this and selling covered calls over a long period of time, that option premium adds up and you can greatly increase your overall gain on a position when you eventually sell it. When that happens, you're in the bottom left-hand corner of this graphic. Your stock got called away, you collected the profits, and now you are free to go back to step number one. If you want to repeat the process on that stock, identify a price where you'd be willing to buy it again and go back and sell some cash secured puts at that strike price. And that wheel just keeps on turning as long as you want to keep trading that stock. Guys, if you have any questions or comments, leave them for me down below. I'm happy to answer those for you. Thank you for watching today. I am Tony Denaro, and I will see ya on the next video.